If you've ever missed a shot because your reticle looked like a smudge in low light, you know a good scope isn't a luxury. It's the difference between a clean hit and a story about the one that got away. I went through the top air rifle scopes people are actually buying and using right now, ranked them by real customer feedback, and counted down to the one with the most reviews behind it. Links to everything are in the description. Let's get into it. Kicking off the list at number 10 is the Hawke Vantage IR 4-12x50, and even at the bottom of this ranking, it's a genuinely premium piece of glass compared to some of the budget options we'll cover later. Hawke built this scope around a rugged 1-inch monotube chassis with an H2 optical system and 11 layers of fully multi-coated lenses, which explains why the image quality reviewers describe is a cut above entry-level scopes. One hunter mounted this on an Air Venturi Avenger in .22 caliber and picked it specifically for Hawke's reputation, the ability to focus parallax down to 10 yards, and the light-gathering power of the 50mm objective lens. He described the image as sharp across the entire field of view and said the parallax adjustment was unusually accurate compared to other scopes he owned. Another air rifle shooter running a pair of PCP rifles said the optics were crisp with no blurring or distortion near the edges, and that the light gathering was strong enough to pick out a deer at near dark that he couldn't see with his naked eye. A shooter running a Benjamin Nitro Trail XL brake barrel said he was hitting inside a dime at 50 feet, praising the 50mm objective for gathering a lot of light and noting there was no detectable color fringing around the edges of the image. Another owner with 3 Hawke scopes across different air rifles said the adjustable objective was a must-have feature and that the optics stayed clear and consistent across every one of his guns. The honest trade-off here is the price point, which sits well above most of the other scopes on this list, and a couple of reviewers noted the turret caps require unscrewing rather than offering tool-free adjustment. But with a 4.4-star rating and glowing feedback from actual air rifle and PCP shooters, this is a scope that earns its spot even with a smaller review count than what's coming next. Speaking of which, the next scope on our list has more than double the reviews, comes in at a fraction of the price, and one shooter used it to turn an air rifle that was destroying its factory scope into what he called a tack driver. MPV-0AO rifle scope with locking turret number 9 is the CVLIFE 2-10x32, and this one immediately shows its value by packing features you'd expect on pricier glass into a much more affordable package. It has a wider 2 to 10 times magnification range than most scopes on this list, a second focal plane design, exposed locking turrets for fast finger adjustments, and a 5-level red and green illuminated reticle for low-light hunting. Hunters using this scope on entry-level AR platforms and PCP rifles have consistently praised its build quality relative to its price. One shooter mounted it on a budget AR with the included cantilever mount and said the assembly went together easily. The reticle color options were a nice touch in low light, and it held 0 after firing several hundred rounds. Another buyer called out the surprisingly good optical clarity compared to a similarly priced competitor scope, noting only mild fisheye distortion at the outer edges of the field of view, while the center stayed sharp even near maximum magnification. One particularly detailed review came from a shooter who bought it during a discount promotion and put it through methodical testing. He found the image held up impressively well, up to about 8.5 times magnification, with only a slight fall-off in clarity and parallax control above that. He specifically praised the illuminated reticle for staying sharp with no flare and appreciated that the green setting lit up brighter than the red. Another owner used it on a short-barreled 300 blackout for range sessions and mentioned an early issue with the windage and elevation screws being loose out of the box, but once tightened down, the scope held its 0 reliably through many additional rounds. The one recurring critique across reviews is that performance tapers off noticeably at the top end of the magnification range, with parallax becoming harder to manage past 8 times. But for the price and feature set, this scope punches well above its weight, and it's earned a loyal following among budget-conscious AR and PCP shooters alike. Next up, we're looking at a scope and laser combo that hunters are mounting on everything from pellet guns to .22 rimfire rifles, with one reviewer saying it performs as well as scopes costing 3 times as much. Number 8 is the UUQ 3-9x40 with an integrated red laser sight. And this is where things get interesting for anyone who wants a 2-in-1 aiming solution rather than just magnified glass. The laser is a Class 3A unit with a daytime sighting range up to 300 feet, paired with a traditional 3 to 9x40 scope body featuring red and green illumination and full multi-coating on the lenses for better light transmission. Air rifle shooters have responded well to this combo. One buyer mounted it on a .22 pellet rifle for target practice and said it dialed in with excellent precision, adding that the laser was an added bonus that was also accurate. He specifically liked that the adjustment dials were tool-free knobs and that mounting was simple with everything fitting tightly together. Another shooter attached the scope to a pellet gun and reported accurate shot placement without complications. A hunter running it on a .22 LRAR upper for squirrel and rabbit hunting said the scope stayed clear and held zero well for that kind of small game application. He noted the laser isn't independently adjustable, so it gets you close to the target rather than dead on, but for a budget scope thrown on a lower-powered rifle, he considered it a solid performer. Customer service also came up repeatedly in reviews, with one buyer recounting how the company quickly replaced a unit that arrived without a functioning zoom or focus mechanism, crediting a representative named Sophia for handling the issue professionally and shipping a replacement right away. Where this scope loses a few points is consistency. One reviewer reported missing mounting hardware in his package, and a couple of buyers noted that units can arrive with quality control issues. Still, with the majority of reviews landing positive and a laser feature that most scopes on this list don't offer at all, it's a legitimate value pick for hunters who want extra aiming versatility. The next scope on our list ditches the laser gimmick entirely and focuses purely on optical clarity, and it's convinced buyers with astigmatism and low-light shooting needs that clear green glass can outperform scopes twice its size. Number 7 is the SVITVU rifle scope, standing out on this list for its distinctive green-tinted, fully multi-coated lenses designed to boost light transmission and reduce glare. It's built on an aircraft-grade aluminum body with a free-floating, nitrogen-filled design for waterproofing, and it ships with both 20mm and 11mm mount options depending on the variant, giving it more flexibility for different rail systems than most scopes at this price point. Hunters using this scope on air rifles have had good things to say about its practical performance. One buyer mounted it on a Daisy 880 air rifle specifically, and while he ran into fitment issues with the included rings, said the scope itself delivered a sharp, clear image and he expected reliable accuracy on his pump-up rifle over time. Another shooter running it on a .22 rimfire found it easy to adjust and easy to see through, calling it good value for the money with surprisingly solid build quality for the price. One detailed review came from a buyer who mounted the scope on an air rifle and was pleasantly surprised, noting the glass stayed clear even at full 9x zoom and that the green lens coating noticeably cut down on glare during sunny outdoor sessions. He specifically called out the fast focus eyepiece as a nice touch, saying it only took a couple of minutes to dial in a sharp reticle. Another shooter running it on a Ruger 1022 said it held zero reliably and needed only about 30 clicks of adjustment before it was consistently on target at extended range. The main criticism that comes up across reviews involves the included scope rings, which several buyers described as needing an upgrade for more demanding rifles, along with occasional reports of turret and elevation adjustments not tracking properly on individual units. Even so, the core optic earns consistent praise for clarity and value, which is why it climbs one spot higher than the UUQ combo. Coming up next, a scope that's earned its illuminated reticle a reputation among .22 and AR shooters alike, with one buyer calling it a huge upgrade over a factory scope that just wouldn't cooperate. Number 6 brings us to the CVLIFE 3-9x40 with red and green illumination, a scope built around a 5-level brightness adjustment system so it can adapt to virtually any lighting condition a hunter runs into. It uses capped, finger-adjustable turrets that reset to 0 after sighting in, and the nitrogen-sealed aluminum body is designed to handle fog and rain without 50 years of experience needed to keep it clear. Real-world hunting feedback on this scope has been notably strong. One buyer mounted it on a high .995 TS 9mm carbine specifically because his eyesight was starting to fail him at distance, and after comparing several similarly priced Chinese-made scopes, he chose this one for the slightly stronger brand reputation. He found mounting straightforward, was eventually able to zero it in reliably at 25 yards, and reported consistent accuracy on follow-up range visits, even though he noted a small parallax quirk between center and off-center aim points. Another shooter running several PCP air rifles and a .22 LR said the glass was clear across all of them and that a friend he gave one to for an older Remington .22 loved it for its ability to compensate for failing eyesight where iron sights had become unusable. A hunter using the scope on a .177 break barrel air rifle reported dialing it in and hitting dime-sized targets consistently out to 60 yards, calling it a dramatic improvement over the stock scope that came with the rifle and that had never held windage correctly. The most detailed praise came from a shooter who had struggled for a long time getting a factory scope zeroed on his air rifle before switching to this one, saying the adjustable objective and clear image let him zero in within minutes and then consistently hit small targets at extended range for the first time. The main critique across reviews is that the base 3 to 9x40 without adjustable objective struggles with close-range clarity under about 15 yards. Otherwise, this is a scope with a real following among budget-conscious air rifle and rimfire hunters. Up next, we're stepping up to a scope that's held 0 through hundreds of rounds on centerfire rifles, and one reviewer put it through an accidental foot-long drop just to see if it would survive. Number 5 is the CVLIFE 3 to 9x40 AO, and the addition of an adjustable objective lens over the standard version is what pushes it ahead on this list. That AO feature lets shooters dial out parallax at varying distances, which matters a lot for anyone shooting both close-range pests and longer shots on the same outing. It ships with two 20mm rings, a fully multi-coated lens system, and a sealed, nitrogen-filled aluminum body. Air rifle and rimfire hunters have put this scope through some serious testing. One buyer mounted it on a 5.56 AR-15 and needed only 6 rounds at 25 yards to get it dialed in nearly perfectly on the horizontal axis. He pushed it out to 100 yards and was consistently grouping shots after just a dozen rounds, and even after an accidental drop of about a foot, the scope held its 0 through a 400-round session without a brace. A shooter using it on an older Mossberg, chambered in .22 WMR, reported it dialed in cleanly and held 0 afterward, praising the adjustable objective specifically for delivering optimal clarity at different distances. Another owner had been fighting with the stock scope on a Crosman F4 air rifle for a long time, unable to get the windage to cooperate no matter how much he adjusted it. After switching to this CVLIFE scope, he was zeroed within 5 or 6 minutes and was consistently hitting dime-sized targets past 60 yards, something he said he never thought possible with that rifle. One reviewer running it on a PCP air rifle noted the scope only had a minor issue. Even after maxing out the elevation adjustment, it still shot slightly low, which he attributed to the higher-profile 40mm objective rather than the scope itself. The recurring theme across reviews is that the adjustable objective genuinely solves the close-range blur problem that shows up on the non-AO version, which is exactly why this scope edges ahead on our list. The next scope trades in the AR and air rifle audience for something built for red dot precision shooters, and it's backed by a warranty policy that reviewers describe as nearly unheard of in the industry. Number 4 is the Vortex Crossfire 2, and stepping up to a recognized optics brand brings a noticeable jump in build confidence among reviewers. This scope features a fast-focus eyepiece, fully multi-coated lenses, and capped, resettable MOA turrets, all wrapped in a single-piece aircraft-grade aluminum tube that's nitrogen-purged for waterproof and fog-proof performance. It's backed by Vortex's unlimited, unconditional lifetime warranty, a detail that comes up constantly in customer feedback. Rimfire and small-game hunters in particular have gravitated toward this scope. One buyer mounted the 2 to 7x32 rimfire version on a Henry lever action .22 and said the image stayed crisp and clear up through about 4 or 5 times magnification, with the eye box staying comfortably forgiving at those settings. He specifically praised the V-Plex reticle as ideal for a .22, calling it simple and clean, and said the turret controls felt smooth with just the right amount of resistance for a 50-yard zero good out to 70 yards. Another shooter mounted it on a Ruger 1022 and described the eye relief as unusually generous, needing to reposition the scope more centrally on the rail because he had extra room to work with. He also mentioned the bore sighting process went smoothly thanks to positively clicking adjustment knobs that were clearly marked for elevation and windage. A hunter comparing this scope directly to a pricier Vortex Diamondback said the Crossfire 2 got him about 80% of the way there optically for roughly half the price, and praised its fast target acquisition for closer-range squirrel hunting, describing a clean headshot on a squirrel at 50 yards during his very first outing with it. The rare complaint that surfaces is a slight point-of-impact shift some buyers noticed after adjusting windage, though most describe the scope as tracking reliably overall. With a 4.8-star rating and heavy praise for both optical clarity and Vortex's warranty support, it's easy to see why this scope outranks the CVLIFE options below it. But the next scope up isn't even a magnified optic at all. It's a red dot sight that's earned nearly 5,000 reviews and a reputation for surviving hundreds of rounds without ever losing 0. Number 3 is the Vortex Strikefire 2, and while it's a red dot rather than a magnified scope, its review count and reputation among hunters and shooters made it impossible to leave off this list. It offers a choice between red and green dot colors with 10 brightness settings, the lowest 2 of which are night vision compatible, all housed in a compact, shockproof, waterproof, and fog-proof aluminum chassis with unlimited eye relief for rapid target acquisition. The hunting and shooting feedback here is extensive and detailed. One shooter with astigmatism said switching between the red and green dot settings made a real difference for his aging eyes, and praised the ability to dial the dot brightness down at longer ranges to shrink its apparent size for more precise aim. He paired it with backup iron sights on a 5.56 pistol build and reported 1-inch groups at 100 yards, even with older ammunition. Another buyer ran nearly 300 rounds through it in a single session and said it never moved or lost its zero, staying dead on target the entire time without needing readjustment. A retired law enforcement officer with 2 decades of experience described mounting this on his AR, zeroing it in after 10 shots, then firing 300 rounds without it drifting even slightly, followed by another 200 rounds a week later with groupings holding steady. He specifically praised the co-witness with his backup iron sights and called the controls instinctive right out of the box. Another reviewer contrasted this red dot favorably against far more expensive battle optics, saying for the price, this Vortex handled everyday range use and hunting applications without any hint of the compromise you'd expect from a budget-friendly price tag. A few buyers did note the 4MOA dot size gets noticeably larger if paired with a magnifier, so precision shooters running a magnifier setup might want a smaller dot option. Otherwise, this optic is close to a home run across thousands of reviewers, and it beats out the Crossfire 2 purely on the sheer scale of proven reliability behind it. We're closing in on the top now, and the next scope brings us back to long-range magnification, with reviewers praising it for turning cheap rifles into surprisingly precise shooters out past 100 yards. Number 2 is the CVLIFE 6 to 24 x 50 AO, and the jump in magnification range alone sets this scope apart from everything else on the list. With a 6 to 24 times zoom and a 50mm objective lens, it's built for hunters who want to reach out to genuinely long distances rather than just close and mid-range shots, and it comes with an adjustable objective for parallax control along with red and green illumination. The volume of positive hunting feedback here is substantial. One shooter described this as a solid optic, especially for the price, noting the glass stayed very clear and the elevation and windage adjustments felt crisp and firm, with the illuminated reticle adding a nice touch for early morning or evening hunts. Another buyer running it on a Ruger 1022 called it an excellent scope for the money, saying he was consistently landing quarter-sized groups at 100 yards with ease and that it held zero reliably. One particularly thorough review came from a shooter who mounted it on a CZ452 rimfire rifle and, despite some initial mounting compatibility issues that required different rings, ended up amazed at the optical clarity for such an inexpensive scope, comparing individual reeds and brush that he could pick out clearly at 100 yards. He also praised the hand-adjustable turrets with tactile and audible clicks, something he said too few scope makers get right. A shooter who moved this scope between multiple air rifles over several years, including a Magnum Springer that had previously destroyed a different scope entirely, said this CVLIFE unit had shot one-hole 5-shot groups at 10 meters consistently and outlasted rifles that chewed through pricier optics. The main critique across reviews is a subset of buyers reporting the scope arrived with a shifted or rattling reticle, or that it destroyed accuracy on their particular rifle rather than improving it, so quality consistency isn't flawless across every unit. Still, with over 9,000 reviews and an overwhelmingly positive track record among long-range air rifle and rimfire shooters, this scope earns the number 2 spot by a wide margin. Which brings us to the very top of the list. Our number 1 pick has more reviews than the rest of this list combined, and it's the scope that's been sitting on the top of the bestseller charts for rifle optics for years running. Taking the number 1 spot is the CVLIFE 3 to 9x40 Optics R4, and when a scope pulls in over 11,000 reviews while sitting as the number 1 bestseller in its entire category, that's not a coincidence. That's years of hunters and shooters putting it through real use and coming back to say it worked. This scope uses a classic duplex crosshair reticle, quarter MOA click adjustments, and a fully sealed, nitrogen-filled, shockproof 1-inch tube designed to handle any weather condition a hunter throws at it. The review volume here tells an incredible story of longevity and durability. One shooter mounted it on a Magnum spring-piston air rifle known for destroying scopes within a week and reported this one survived several weeks and hundreds of shots before he eventually moved it to a different, gentler air rifle where it continued performing flawlessly, still producing tight groups years later. He specifically called out CVLIFE's customer service for reaching out proactively when he reported an issue with a different unit, saying the company handled the situation professionally. Another buyer mounted the 11mm version on a Gamo Silent Cat pellet rifle and said the mount fit perfectly. The scope was surprisingly clear for the money, and he was already picking off blackbirds his first afternoon with it. A hunter running it on an older Remington pellet gun said the scope made him feel like a sharpshooter, joking that squirrels in his yard didn't stand a chance anymore. Another shooter running it on a Ruger 1022 said the upgrade from the factory 4x20 scope was dramatic, getting it dialed in quickly at 50 yards and staying consistently pleased with the results. A reviewer running the scope on a 1022 for an extended period highlighted how well it held zero through recoil and rough handling in a vehicle, and while walking through the woods, while acknowledging the tall scope rings included weren't his favorite. The recurring honest critique across the review base is that at higher magnification, some users notice the image getting slightly softer, and a handful of buyers report the reticle losing its rigidity over time on harder recoiling platforms. But with over 1,000 units sold in the past month alone and more reviews than every other scope on this list combined, the CVLIFE 3-9x40R4 earns its place as the most trusted, most purchased air rifle scope on the market right now. That wraps up our countdown of the 10 best air rifle scopes available right now. All the links are in the description below if you want to check current availability and pricing. If you're chasing pure long-range magnification, the CVLIFE 6 to 24x50 AO at number 2 deserves a serious look. But if you just want the scope that hunters keep buying over and over again, the R4 at number 1 is the safest bet you can make.